The city was always loud, but for her, the loudest noise came from inside her own head. It was the sound of worries, a constant, buzzing hum of numbers and dates. The number of days until the rent was due. The number of dollars left in her bank account after buying groceries. The number of hours she needed to work just to keep the lights on and her two kids in sneakers. That fit, she was a mother, and in many ways, she felt like she was a machine built for survival. Her days started before the sun came up in the small, cramped apartment that felt even smaller on rainy days. She'd move quietly in the dark, making breakfast, packing lunches, her body moving on autopilot while her mind was already racing through the day's checklist. Get the kids to school, take the first bus across town, work her shift, take the second bus back, pick up the kids, make dinner, help with homework, fall into bed only to do it all over again tomorrow. Her work was tough but simple. She was a home health aide, which meant she helped people who couldn't fully help themselves. An elderly man who lived in a big, quiet house needed company and needed help with his daily routine. She would bathe him, make his meals, and make sure he took his medicine. She was good at her job because she was kind and she was strong. She had a calm way about her that made people feel safe. But while she was caring for everyone else's life, her own dreams were sitting on a shelf, gathering dust. A long time ago, she had a different plan. She wanted to be a nurse, a proper nurse who worked with children in a hospital. She had even started the classes for it. But then life happened. The money ran out. The kids came. The dream got pushed further and further away, until it started to feel like a story she had once heard about someone else. To get to her client's house, she had found a shortcut. Instead of walking along the noisy, crowded main streets, she would cut through a beautiful, quiet office complex called Omnicorp Plaza. It was like stepping into another world. The grass was always a perfect, bright green. There were clean, smooth paths to walk on, and benches placed under tidy little trees. Fountains sprayed water into the air, and the sound was so much nicer than the blaring of car horns. For those few minutes each day, she could pretend the weight on her shoulders was a little lighter. She could breathe. On one particular Tuesday morning, the air was crisp and cool. She was walking through the plaza, her mind, as usual, somewhere else. She was thinking about her son. His class was going on a special field trip to the Science Museum, a trip that cost $40. $40 might as well have been for $100. She was trying to figure out what she could possibly cut from this week's budget to make it work. The thought of his disappointed face was a physical ache in her chest. It was because her head was down, lost in this painful math, that she almost didn't notice the man up ahead. He was in a wheelchair, positioned on the smooth path. At first glance, he looked like any other busy person. He was dressed in an expensive-looking suit, and he had the posture of someone important, even while sitting down. But something was wrong. It was a small thing. A feeling more than anything. He wasn't moving. He was just stuck. Her trained eyes, used to noticing small changes in her clients, saw the details. He was slumped to one side just a little. One of his hands was clenched into a tight fist, pressed hard against the middle of his chest. His other hand was fumbling, weakly, with the control for his chair. But his fingers didn't seem to be working right. His face had a strange, gray color to it, and a fine layer of sweat shone on his forehead despite the cool morning. Her own problems, the $40, the rent, everything, vanished from her mind in a single heartbeat. The quiet, tired mother was gone, and in her place was a responder. Her body moved before her brain had even fully processed the situation. She hurried over to him, her steps quick and sure. "Sir?" she said, her voice calm but clear. "Sir, can you hear me?" The man's eyes flickered towards her. They were wide, full of a deep, terrifying fear. He tried to say something, to form a word, but his mouth only opened and closed. All that came out was a harsh, ragged gasp for air. He was drowning on dry land. Her heart was pounding now, but her hands were steady. This was a heart attack. She was sure of it. The first thing she did was make sure his wheelchair's brakes were locked, so he wouldn't roll away or tip over. She leaned in closer, keeping her voice low and reassuring. "It's okay," she told him, looking directly into his frightened eyes. "You're not alone. I'm right here with you. Help is coming. Just hold on. Breathe for me if you can." She pulled her phone from her pocket, her fingers dialing the 3 numbers she hoped she would never have to call. When the operator answered, her voice was amazingly clear. "I need an ambulance at Omnicorp Plaza. A man is having a heart attack. He's in a wheelchair. He's conscious, but he can't speak. He's having trouble breathing." She gave the exact location, her words crisp and efficient. While she was still on the line, she saw his expensive phone sitting in a holder on his chair. She carefully picked it up. The screen was locked, but an emergency call was coming through. She answered it. It was his assistant, calling to check on his arrival. "Your boss is having a medical emergency," she said into the phone, her tone leaving no room for doubt. "An ambulance is on its way to Omnicorp Plaza. You need to get here now." She put the phone down and turned her attention back to the man. She talked to him, a steady, quiet stream of words, telling him his name, telling him her name, telling him that he was going to be okay. She was an anchor in the storm of his panic, a calm presence in the middle of the beautiful, empty plaza. She didn't see a powerful CEO. She didn't see a rich man. She only saw a human being in desperate trouble, and she refused to let him face it alone. As just the world seemed to shrink down to that one spot on the smooth, stone path. The sound of the fountains, which usually felt so peaceful, now just felt far away and unimportant. The only things that were real were the man's labored breathing and the frantic beat of her own heart. She kept one hand gently on his shoulder, a small point of contact to let him know he wasn't alone. Her other hand was busy, still holding the phone to her ear as the 911 operator gave her instructions. "The ambulance is just a few minutes away," the operator's voice said, calm and steady. "Can you tell me if he's awake?" "He's awake," she replied, her eyes fixed on the man's face. "His eyes are open, but he looks very confused. He's trying to talk, but he can't. It's just gasps." She could see the pure terror in his eyes. This was a man who was used to being in control, used to giving orders and having the whole world listen. Now, his own body had betrayed him, and he had no control at all. He was completely helpless, and he knew it. That fear was maybe even worse than the pain. "It's okay," she whispered to him again, leaning a little closer. "You don't have to talk. Just look at me. Just focus on my voice. The ambulance is coming. They're going to help you." She saw him try to nod, a tiny, weak movement of his head. A little spark of relief went through her. He could understand her. He could hear her. That was a good sign. In the distance, she finally heard it, the beautiful, wailing sound of a siren. It was getting closer, fast. The sound seemed to jolt the man a little. His hand, the one that wasn't clutching his chest, twitched and moved slightly, as if he was trying to point towards the main road. "They're coming," she said, her voice firm with reassurance. "I can hear them. Just hold on. Just a little bit longer." Less than a minute later, a big, white ambulance swung into the plaza, its red and white lights flashing, cutting through the calm morning. The siren cut off with a final whoop, and the sudden quiet felt heavy. Two paramedics, a man and a woman, jumped out. They moved with a quick, confident efficiency that was amazing to watch. They pulled a gurney and a big box of equipment from the back of the truck and rushed over. The mother immediately stepped back to give them space, but she didn't leave. She quickly explained what she had seen, how she found him, the clutching of his chest, the trouble breathing, the gray color of his skin. The paramedics took over. They started putting little pads on his chest connected to a machine. They put an oxygen mask over his nose and mouth. They were talking to him in calm, clear voices, just like she had been. "Sir, we're here to help you. We're going to get you to the hospital. You're doing great." As they were carefully moving him from his wheelchair onto the gurney, a black car came speeding into the plaza and screeched to a halt right behind the ambulance. A young, sharply dressed man jumped out, his face pale with panic. This must be the assistant she had spoken to on the phone, Mr. Thorne. He cried out, rushing towards the gurney. One of the paramedics held up a hand. "We need space to work, sir." The assistant stopped, looking completely lost. His eyes darted from his boss on the gurney to the mother, who was still standing a few feet away, watching everything. He walked over to her. "Are you the one who called?" he asked, his voice shaky. "Yes," she said simply. "I saw him. I saw what was happening and I called. The doctors. The hospital." He stammered, pulling out his phone. "I need to call his family. I need to." He was so flustered he could barely function. The mother, even though her own adrenaline was still rushing, felt a wave of pity for him. He was just a kid, really, and his whole world was crashing down. She pointed towards the man's wheelchair and the phone that was still in its holder. "Maybe you should take his things," she suggested gently. "And you should probably follow the ambulance to the hospital." Her simple, practical words seemed to snap him back to reality. Yes, you're right." He went and gathered the phone and a briefcase that was hanging on the back of the wheelchair. He looked back at her. Thank you for what you did." Before she could reply, the paramedics were already loading the gurney into the back of the ambulance. The doors slammed shut. With the siren now off, the ambulance drove away quickly, but not frantically. The assistant ran to his car and sped off after it, and just like that, the plaza was quiet again. The mother was left standing alone. The whole event, from the moment she first saw him to the ambulance driving away, had probably taken less than 10 minutes. But it felt like a lifetime. The adrenaline that had been keeping her going suddenly drained away, and she felt weak. Her hands started to shake. She took a deep, ragged breath. She looked down at her own hands. They were empty. And then she remembered the time. She was going to be late for her client. Her client, the elderly man, would be waiting for her. His medicine, his breakfast, it all depended on her showing up on time. The worry about her son's field trip, the rent, all the heavy thoughts from before came flooding back, but they felt different now. They felt smaller. She had just watched a man fight for his life. Her own problems were still big and real, but in that moment, they didn't seem quite as huge as death. She picked up her own bag from where she had dropped it on the grass. She straightened her coat, and then she started walking again, continuing her journey to work. Her heart was still pounding in her chest, a steady drumbeat reminding her of what had just happened. She didn't know if the man would be okay. She hoped with all her heart that he would. But as she walked, a new, small worry started to creep into her mind. She had been a witness to a very private, very scary moment in a powerful man's life. People like that, she thought, they often didn't like to be seen in a moment of weakness. Maybe he would be embarrassed. Maybe he would even be angry that she had gotten involved. She pushed the thought away. It didn't matter. She had done what any decent person should do. She had helped someone who was in trouble. Nothing else was important. She finally reached her client's house. She was only a few minutes late. She let herself in with her key. The elderly man was sitting in his favorite chair by the window. "You're late," he said. But there was no anger in his voice, just a simple statement. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice feeling a little rough. There was a situation in the plaza. She went about her normal routine. She made his breakfast. She got his pills ready. But her hands were still a little unsteady, and her mind was still back on that path. With the sound of those ragged breaths and the flashing of the ambulance lights, she had started her day worrying about $40. She had no way of knowing that her simple act of stopping to help was about to change everything. For now, there was just work, and the quiet, steady hope that the man in the suit was going to be all right. The rest of the day felt like moving through a thick fog. Her body went through the motions with her elderly client helping him with his lunch, tidying the house, reading him the newspaper, but her mind was somewhere else. It kept replaying the morning in short, sharp pictures, the man's gray face, the sound of the siren, the look of pure fear in his eyes. When her shift finally ended, she felt a deep tiredness, the kind that goes right down to your bones. The bus ride home was slow, and she stared out the window without really seeing the city go by. She wondered if the man had made it to the hospital in time. She wondered if he was still alive. Walking into her apartment was like stepping back into her real world. Her two children were at the kitchen table, the older one trying to help the younger one with a coloring book. They both looked up when she came in, and the noise and the warmth of the place wrapped around her like a blanket. "Mama, you look tired," her daughter said, her little face full of concern. "I'm okay, baby," she said, managing a small smile. "Just a long day." She started making dinner, the familiar sounds of pots and pans helping to ground her. But the worry for the man was still there, a quiet hum in the back of her mind. She knew she would probably never know what happened to him. He was a rich man from a different world, and she was just a home health aide who happened to be in the right place at the right time. Their paths had crossed for one dramatic moment, and that was probably the end of it. The next 2 days passed just like any other. The busy, tiring rhythm of her life took over again. The memory of the man in the plaza started to feel a little more distant, a little more like a dream. She was back to worrying about real things, like the electric bill and her son's field trip money. Then, on the third day, something unusual happened. She was getting the kids ready for school when the doorbell rang. This was strange. No one ever visited this early. She wiped her hands on a towel and went to the door, peering through the little peephole. A man in a uniform was standing there, holding a massive bouquet of flowers. They weren't from a grocery store. These were fancy, the kind you see in movies, with exotic-looking blooms and greens she didn't even know the name of. Cautiously, she opened the door. "Delivery for a Ms. Davis," the man said, holding out an electronic device for her to sign. She was so surprised she just nodded and scribbled her name. He handed her the heavy bouquet. The flowers were stunning, a burst of color and life in her simple hallway. The kids rushed over, their eyes wide. "Wow, Mama. Who are they from?" her son asked, trying to touch a bright pink flower. I don't know," she said, her voice a whisper. She found a tall vase and put the flowers in water. Tucked among the stems was a small, thick envelope. Her name was written on the front in elegant, slanted handwriting. She opened it carefully. Inside was a card made of heavy, expensive feeling paper. She read the words slowly. To Ms. Davis. The doctors inform me that your swift action on Tuesday morning is the reason I am still here to write this note. There is no thanks sufficient for such a gift. You have my deepest and most sincere gratitude. Sincerely, Julian Thorne. She read it twice. Julian Thorne. So that was his name. And he was alive. He was alive and well enough to write this note. A huge wave of relief washed over her, so strong it made her knees feel weak. She hadn't realized how heavy the worry for him had been until it was lifted. The kids were buzzing with excitement about the flowers, but for her, the note was the real gift. Knowing he was okay was all the thanks she needed. She put the card on the small shelf near the kitchen table, a little reminder that there was still goodness in the world. The flowers were beautiful, but they also felt a little out of place in her apartment. They were a piece of his world, a world of penthouses and personal drivers, sitting right here among her secondhand furniture. She appreciated the gesture deeply, but a part of her thought that this was the end of it. A rich man had said thank you in the way rich men do with an expensive gift. The story was over. What she didn't know was that for Julian Thorne, this was just the beginning. From his penthouse apartment, where he was resting under strict doctor's orders, Julian Thorne was not a man who did things by half measures. He was a builder, a man who saw patterns and potential where others saw chaos. Being saved by a stranger was not just a lucky break to him. It was a data point. It was an event that required understanding. He had asked his assistant to find out about the woman who saved him. He didn't want to invade her privacy, but he wanted to know the basic facts of her life. He felt he owed her that much, at least. A day later, his assistant came to him with a brief report. It wasn't a long document. It told a story that was, in its own way, as stark and clear as a balance sheet. It told him she was a single mother of two. It listed her job as a home health aide. And then, it mentioned one more thing, a single line that caught his sharp businessman's eye. It noted that she had previously been enrolled in a nursing program but had to withdraw due to financial constraints. He read that line again. Financial constraints. He looked out the window of his penthouse. The whole city spread out beneath him like a map of possibilities. He thought of this woman, with her calm voice and her steady hands. She had the skill and the presence of mind to save a life. Yet she didn't have the money to finish the training that would let her do that as a career. The injustice of it struck him deeply. For him, a problem was something to be solved. A debt was something to be paid. And he saw in this situation a problem and a debt of the highest order. A simple bouquet of flowers was a nice gesture, but it was not a solution. It was not an investment. He picked up his phone, a new plan already forming in his mind. It wasn't about charity. He didn't believe in just handing out money. He believed in potential. He believed in investing in assets that were undervalued. And as he saw it, a woman who could save a CEO's life while on her way to a low-wage job was perhaps the most undervalued asset he had ever encountered. The call he was about to make would not be a simple thank you. It would be a proposal. But for now, the mother knew none of this. She simply went about her day. The beautiful flowers on her table, a sweet but fading memory of a strange morning, completely unaware that her quiet life was about to be turned upside down. The beautiful flowers on her kitchen table slowly began to wilt. The bright colors faded, and a few petals drifted down onto the surface. It was a quiet, gentle reminder that life moves on. For the mother, life had certainly moved right back to its usual difficult rhythm. The memory of that morning in the plaza, and the stunning bouquet that followed, started to feel more and more like something that had happened to someone else. The note from Julian Thorne was tucked away in a drawer. It was a nice thing to have, a little sparkle in a life that often felt gray. But it didn't change the fact that the rent was due, or that her son's teacher had sent a second reminder about the field trip money. She was on her hands and knees, scrubbing the kitchen floor. It was a job she hated, but it needed to be done. The bucket of soapy water was beside her, and the radio was playing softly in the background. Her mind was, as usual, a million miles away, doing the math. If she skipped getting her own hair cut this month, and if she stretched the groceries just a little further, she could probably come up with that $40. It would be tight, but she could do it. The thought of her son's happy face made the sacrifice feel worth it. Suddenly, her phone vibrated on the countertop, skittering across the surface. She sat back on her heels, wiping her wet hands on her old jeans. The screen showed unknown number. She usually never answered these. It was always someone trying to sell her something she couldn't afford, or a recorded message about her car's extended warranty, a car she didn't even own. But something made her pause. Maybe it was the doctor's office calling about an appointment, or the school. She couldn't take the risk of missing something important. She got up and answered the phone. "Hello?" she said, her voice a little breathless from the scrubbing. There was a brief pause on the other end, and then a man's voice, calm and clear, spoke. "Is this Ms. Davis?" "Yes, speaking," she said, a little wary. "Ms. Davis, this is Julian Thorne." The world seemed to stop for a second. The soapy water, the dirty floor, the radio playing a pop song, it all just faded into a dull buzz. She was so surprised she couldn't even speak. She just stood there in her messy kitchen, holding the phone to her ear. He continued, his voice firm but not unkind. "You saved my life last week. I sent a note, but I felt that wasn't nearly enough." She finally found her voice. "Oh, the flowers were beautiful. Thank you. You really didn't have to." "But I did," he interrupted gently, but with a tone that left no room for argument. "You see, Ms. Davis, I don't believe in debt. I have spent my entire life making sure I owe nothing to anyone. But I do believe in investment. I've invested in companies and buildings and ideas. Now, I would like to invest in a person." She leaned against the kitchen counter for support. Her legs felt weak. What was he saying? What did he mean? Her mind was racing, trying to catch up. "I've learned a little about your situation," he said. And she could hear him choosing his words very carefully. "I know you have 2 children. I know you work as a home health aide. And I know that you once had a goal to become a nurse." She felt a strange mix of emotions. A part of her felt exposed, as if someone had been looking through her private life. But a bigger part of her was just stunned that a man like him would even bother to know these things. That was a long time ago," she said softly. The old dream feeling fragile as glass, just saying it out loud. "A dream shouldn't have an expiration date," he replied. "So, here is my proposal. I will pay off every single debt you have. Your student loans, any medical bills, everything. I will wipe the slate completely clean." She couldn't breathe. Her hand was gripping the counter so hard her knuckles were white. This couldn't be real. It was a prank. It had to be. He wasn't finished. "Then, I will pay the full tuition for you to go back to nursing school. Every class, every book, every fee. All of it." Tears were welling up in her eyes now, blurring her vision. She could hear her children laughing in the next room, and the sound mixed with his voice on the phone, creating a scene that felt impossible. "But that's not all," he said. "I know you can't study and work and raise 2 children all at once. So, a trust will be set up. It will cover your rent, your groceries, your bills, and all childcare costs for as long as you are in school. You will not have to worry about money. Your only job will be to focus on your studies." A sob escaped her lips, and she quickly put her hand over her mouth. The weight of 1,000 worries, 1,000 sleepless nights, was suddenly being lifted off her shoulders by a voice on the telephone. It was too much to process. "Why?" was the only word she could manage to whisper. "Why would you do all this?" There was another pause on the other end of the line, and when he spoke again, his voice was different, softer. "Because you acted when you didn't have to. You saw a human being in trouble, and you helped. You didn't walk away. That is a quality that cannot be taught. The world needs more nurses like that. All I ask in return is that you finish what you started. You graduate, and then you go on to save other lives, just as you saved mine. Consider this not a gift, Ms. Davis, but a partnership." She was crying fully now, silent tears streaming down her face. She looked around her small, cluttered kitchen, at the mop bucket and the worn-out floor. It was the same place, but it felt different. It felt like it had a future now. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "You don't have to say anything right now," he said, his tone becoming businesslike again. "My assistant will email you all the details. There will be paperwork to sign. You can think about it, and you can let him know your decision. Take your time." They said a brief goodbye, and the call ended. She slowly lowered the phone, placing it on the counter as if it were made of the finest crystal. She stood there for a long time, just staring at the wall, listening to the sound of her children in the next room. The feeling was overwhelming. It wasn't just happiness. It was a profound, earth-shattering sense of hope. A door she thought had been locked and bolted shut forever was now swinging wide open. For the first time in so many years, the path ahead wasn't a dark, difficult climb. It was lit up, clear, and full of promise. Her dream was no longer a faded photograph. It was a future waiting for her to walk into it. The days and weeks that followed the phone call were a whirlwind, but a beautiful one. It was like watching a black and white picture slowly fill with color. The first thing she did, after the tears of shock and joy had dried, was to sit down with her children. She pulled them close and tried to explain in the simplest way she could. "Remember the beautiful flowers we got?" she asked them. Her son nodded, his eyes big. "Well, the man who sent them, he's going to help Mama go back to school, to become a nurse." Her daughter, who was a little older, understood more. So, we don't have to worry about money anymore. The mother hugged her tight, her voice thick with emotion. No, baby, we don't. The paperwork came just as he said it would. It was thick and full of legal words that made her head spin. But she read every line, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. It was all real. It outlined the trust for her living expenses, the payment of her tuition, and the clearing of all her debts. There were no hidden tricks. It was exactly as he had promised. Signing her name at the bottom felt more significant than anything she had ever done. It wasn't just a signature. It was the key to a new life. The changes started almost immediately. The constant, grinding pressure that had been her shadow for years began to lift. She gave her notice at her job, thanking her elderly client with a genuine warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. She went to the bank and saw the first deposit from the trust hit her account. It was enough to cover the rent and bills for the month, with plenty left over for groceries and things for the kids. She didn't go on a wild shopping spree. The first thing she did was pay for her son's field trip. Then she bought her daughter the new shoes she had been needing. It felt incredible. With the practical worries handled, she could focus all her energy on her goal. She enrolled in a fast-track nursing program at a good community college. Walking into the administration office to finalize her enrollment, with a financial guarantee letter in her hand, was one of the proudest moments of her life. The woman behind the desk smiled at her. Your tuition is all taken care of. You're all set. She bought her books and notebooks, running her hands over the clean, smooth covers. She had a purpose now, a clear path. Studying was hard. Her brain felt rusty after so many years away from a classroom. There were long nights spent at the kitchen table, surrounded by textbooks, memorizing anatomy terms and medical procedures. But it was a different kind of tired. It was a tired that felt productive, a tired that meant she was building something. Her children saw the change in her. She was still their mom, still made them dinner, and helped with homework. But there was a new light in her eyes. She was happier, more present. She wasn't constantly distracted by a mountain of worries. They were proud of her, and they told her so. 2 years can feel like a lifetime, or it can pass in the blink of an eye. For her, it was a little of both. There were moments of struggle, of self-doubt, when she wondered if she was smart enough or strong enough to do this. But then she would remember the feeling of helping the man in the plaza, the certainty in her hands and her voice. She remembered that she had already proven she could handle a crisis. She could do this. The day of her graduation arrived. She put on the blue cap and gown, her hands trembling as she pinned the cap in place. Her children were in the audience, dressed in their best clothes, beaming with pride. As she walked across the stage to receive her nursing diploma, the auditorium erupted in applause. She looked out into the crowd, saw her children clapping wildly, and the tears came freely this time. They were tears of pure, uncomplicated joy. She had done it. A few weeks later, she started her new job as a registered nurse in the pediatric ward of the city hospital. On her first day, wearing her new blue scrubs with her name and the title RN embroidered on the chest, she felt a sense of rightness she had never known. Her first patient was a little girl, scared and crying after a surgery. The mother knelt by the bed, her voice calm and reassuring, just as it had been on a plaza years before. It's okay, she told the little girl, gently holding her hand. You're not alone. I'm right here with you. You're going to be just fine. She looked up and saw the girl's mother watching her, her face full of the same relief and gratitude she herself had once felt. In that moment, the circle was complete. She and Julian Thorne never became close friends. Theirs was not that kind of story. They exchanged a few formal letters over the years. He would write to congratulate her on her graduation, on passing her board exams. She would write to him on the anniversary of that day in the plaza, to thank him again and update him on her life. It was a respectful, distant connection between two people from different worlds who had shared one life-changing moment. For him, she knew, his investment had paid off. He had told her to go out and save other lives, and that is exactly what she did, every single day. For her, the memory of that day was a quiet, steady reminder. It reminded her that kindness is never wasted. It reminded her that a single act, done without any thought of reward, can send out ripples that change the course of a life. She had saved a man, and in return, he had given her back her future. And now, she would spend that future doing the same for others. Her life was no longer just about survival. It was about purpose. And it was just beginning.